The Cuyahoga County Public Works Committee, Public Works Procurement and Contracting Committee for Wednesday, December 6, 2017 will please come to order, and the clerk will call the roll.
Calling the roll, Mr. Miller,
Here.
Ms. Conwell,
Here.
Mr. Schrein,
Here.
Ms. Baker, Mr. Tuma is absent. There is a quorum.
Thank you very much. Do we have anybody signed in for public comment related to the agenda?
Yes, Mr. Chair. First is Mr. Jeff Epstein.
Good morning, Councilman. Thanks for allowing me to come in and speak this morning. We had submitted a letter earlier this week. I'm not sure if a copy of it made its way to you, and I also distributed.
The letter did make its way. It was widely read.
Good, thank you. I just wanted to hit on a few high points of the letter, and also I distributed to the clerk a map of the area and some pictures of some of the projects that are happening in the area. I'm the executive director of Midtown Cleveland Incorporated. We are the community and economic development organization that is responsible for this neighborhood. We have seen and been working with a variety of community stakeholders and developers in attracting investment and transforming Midtown through our strategic plan from something that is seen as a pass-through to something that's seen as a place. And in this particular stretch of Euclid Avenue between 55th and 75th, we've seen $200 million of real estate investment over the last 9 years since the health line went in. We have high-tech companies coming up, publicly traded companies that are moving in, and the theme of development in this particular area has been around high-growth technology companies moving into the area, around amenities coming in around them, residential, and the transit garage that the county owns that's in question here sits right in the middle of that investment. We are concerned with potential uses of that transit garage that continue as a transit garage. It is a large piece of property that sits right in the middle of it. The current zoning for this property is Midtown mixed use, so that the transit garage could not be built or operated as it is today if it were constructed today. All of the City of Cleveland approved plans for the neighborhood call for a denser mixed use in this particular area. Moreover, to talk a little bit about some of the investment, and I'm not sure if you have the map that I submitted in front of you. You guys have that map that it was in a packet that I get this morning out. So you can see all of the investment around it. We have a Hilton True Hotel going in right next door. We have townhomes going in 2 blocks east. Dealer Tire just completed a massive investment directly across the street between the building and the build out in the garage, close to $50 million. We have Dunn & Tavern, which is the largest green space between downtown University Circle, 2 blocks west. And all of this development investment has really been around trying to bring greater density, greater vibrancy, and greater energy to the area. Is that I need to stop talking, Bill?
It is, but you can take another minute or so and finish your thought.
Just to conclude, I think it's important in the county's process here that you consider and take into account the neighborhood, the development around here, and the overall economic impact, and that the consideration of this property is not strictly a dollar and cents type of thing. The city and its land disposition has disposed of land consistent with neighborhood plan. Other public agencies, I just read an article yesterday about how RTA has disposed of a garage after turning out higher bidders because they were waiting for a use that was consistent with the neighborhood. And I would just encourage you to listen to the voices of Midtown, look at the economic impact around.
Okay, thank you very much.
Next is Sharon El-Amin.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. I'm here representing Dealer Tire. And what I wanted to say is that Dealer Tire, we made a major investment right across the street from this property. And we have brought 500 jobs to the area, and we're bringing 100 more. Please excuse my voice. I caught a cold, so it's a little skippy.
No problem.
And we're planning on bringing 100 more. And what we've done, we've created a campus environment for our world headquarters, which that's what it is. And we would like to see more positive investments within that area that would help bring improvement to the area and neighborhood around us. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is Alfred Geis.
Good morning, Fred Geis.
Good morning.
First of all, I'd like to start off by saying that Tony George is as good a developer as anybody in the city of Cleveland, has done as much to change the city as any other developer. This is not about Tony George. This is about how the economic development growth of Midtown is happening. Our projects, we have over $100 million invested, created $54 million in payroll, of which 63% is female employees, 35% minorities, and 17% City of Cleveland residents. Overall, there's over 75% county residents. This is the type of growth that I would like to continue seeing in the area. We, of course, are concerned about our investment. We would like to see continued development happening. I'm not sure what either developer has in mind with the building, but I request that caution is taken, that whatever continued investment happens in the area is positive investment. The building gets upgraded, the neighborhood needs to change, and we need to see people on the sidewalk. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next is Chris Casmar. Is that right?
Good morning. I'm here representing Health Tech Hospitality. We are directly across the street from the subject property in question on the west side of 70th. I'm representing a group that recently purchased the property. We're developing a Hilton True Hotel on the southern half of the property, and we're currently looking at different uses for the northern half that include residential uses and so forth, and are here to voice our support for the comments that Mr. Epstein made from Midtown. We think that the investment that we've made is significant. It's going to bring jobs to the area, potentially new residents to the area. We think being carefully considerate of a neighborhood plan is the right decision with respect to the decisions that are going to be made for the garage across the street, and would ask that you carefully consider those impacts to neighboring surrounding properties moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next is Lloyd Bill.
Good morning. I am the chairman of the board of directors of Midtown Cleveland, and I represent, our board represents a number of stakeholders both within and outside of the Midtown neighborhood. And we have spent a considerable amount of time over the past 2 years putting together a strategic plan for the neighborhood that includes many of the details that Mr. Epstein was referencing. I merely am here to ask that the council consider the work of the board and of the organization and of the city as using developing the neighborhood in the highest and best use for a high-tech, mixed-use, dense urban environment. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Next is Tony George.
Wow, I got a conspiracy here. I could just feel it in the air. First of all, let me address Midtown Corridor. When Midtown Corridor first started, they were happy to see the George Group and the George family buy buildings in the Midtown Corridor and develop them. My various companies and my family own about 15 buildings in Midtown Corridor that have been totally redeveloped and 100% occupied. And we don't do a shabby job. We do a nice job. This is why the voters of Cuyahoga County can't trust county government. The last time I was here, I was the highest bidder of a building, and they made it go to rebids, forced me to bid higher. I bid higher, the other bidder didn't show up, and now they're going to conspire against me because of the use of the building, which the building was being used by the county as a service building. That's what it was built for. That's what I'm going to use it for. Whether it's my company or a tenant, it's going to stay the same use. Dealer Tire, I appreciate them building down there. They knew what was across the street when they built. If they didn't like the use of the building, they could have come to the bid and bid higher than I did. They didn't. Midtown Corridor could have came and bid higher than I did. They didn't. Fred Geist and I are good friends. Unbelievable developer. Part of the reason Cleveland and Cuyahoga counties is going in the right direction is because of developers like Fred Geist and the George family. And the George family. There's history between the George family and the county. The last time a set of buildings were put up for auction, 6 different buildings. We were the highest bidder on the Courthouse Square building, and we scored the highest points. Only building pulled and not sold. I feel like there's a conspiracy against the George family. I'm the highest bidder. At the last meeting, you said, take the gloves off and let us go at it. We did. We won. The other bidder didn't even show up. It was a setup, as far as I was concerned, by the broker, the county, and Midtown Corridor. A setup. I'm going to estimate that my family has about $30 million in investment in the Midtown Corridor with various corporations that we own and properties that we own. That represents over 10% of the total investment. I just feel that our loyalty and devotion to the city of Cleveland, as well as the Cuyahoga County, constantly gets abused. And I'm disappointed in everybody sitting behind me and their actions moving forward. I rest my case. I'm the highest bidder. It's my property as far as I'm concerned, and I could use it for whatever I want. Just like Fred Geist can use his property for whatever he wants, and the county can use their property for whatever they want, and Midtown Corridor could do whatever they want. They should not conspire against another developer. This is bullshit. The county should not be involved in picking winners or losers. This is bullshit.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Next is Ronald Fuqua.
Hi, good morning. Yeah, my name is Ron Fuqua, and this gentleman here, he kind of expressed some of my own opinion. Unfortunately, he expressed it from a investor standpoint from one end. I expressed it from a different perspective. I'm a resident of Midtown for nearly 30 years, and the investment that he talked about in money, I express it in a different way, in the life of my family, my children, who was raised in the Midtown. And from what I hear about this gentleman, he is a man of integrity. Matter of fact, I didn't know his name before, so I contacted a childhood friend of mine, Coach Tay, again, to ask, who is this guy? And he said, he's a good man, he works hard, he's a family man. And I respect that. What I want for Midtown is the thing I've been pushing for almost 30 years, and that is investment in my community. As a matter of fact, I've been through about 3 or 4 executive directors at the Midtown, pushing to have economic development in the area where I put my money in. And for the first time, I have someone who hears what my family has to say. And that is that we need to have upward mobility. And that is the strategic plan that was put in place. We were so excited about it because we, for the first time, have seen a shift in our actual values in our property for the first time in almost 30 years. So when I hear about this program, at least for what I know about it, maybe I can get a chance to talk to them even more afterwards. I was a bit concerned only because the health tech dynamics is something that is consistent through the community. And we wanted to see that grow. And I would hope that what he's doing is synonymous with that. But I want to thank you for your time. I really hope that the decisions that you all make have the impact that is consistent with what's going on today in the Midtown. Thank you.
Thank you.
And the last speaker is Mr. Richard Pace.
Good morning. My name's Dick Pace, property owner at 71st and Euclid in the Midtown corridor. I have been since 2006. I don't know Mr. George, and so I'm not part of any conspiracy. I'm here as a neighbor and an investor. It's important that the Midtown corridor continue to be supported in its redevelopment and repositioning as a health tech corridor. That's critical for our development and for our investment. It's also critical for the county's investment. The county invested in our building initially with the brownfield loan. You've invested in many other properties in Midtown. You want to make sure that that investment is wisely placed and we don't end up going back instead of going forward. So that's the first issue. Second issue, in my view, is a flawed process. And I think Mr. George alluded to the fact that this was a flawed process. And that signals real problems in the future for other acquisitions or sale by the county and acquisitions by the private market. If we can't have a fair and open process and then have certainty on the process, and if the lawyers end up controlling the process, it changes the dynamic totally. So I hope that that's not going to be the case. I hope that the county supports the redevelopment for economic development here and that we can move forward. And again, I have nothing against Mr. George. I'm glad to hear that he also is an investor in Midtown, and I wish him the best. I just don't think that's the highest and best use for that property. Thank you.
Any more?
No one else is signed in.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes for November 16th, 2017. Do we have a motion relative to those minutes?
So move to approve.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say nay. Ayes have it, and the minutes are approved. The next item on the agenda is the discussion in executive session, and with this being on the agenda, we have the authority to go into executive session if we need to, and and sale of real property is one of the items under the Ohio Revised Code for which an executive session is permitted. However, my preference is not to go into executive session if it isn't necessary, and to do this in public. So we're gonna pass on item number 5 for now. But if in the course of our discussion on item number 6, if we find the need to go into executive session, then we'll revert back to it. So we're going to move on then to item number 6, Resolution 2017-0199.
Resolution number 2017-0199, authorizing a purchase and sale agreement with Collab Partners in the amount of $2,500,000 for property located at 7001 Euclid Avenue, Cleveland.
Thank you very much, and I understand that our brokers who assisted with this process that are prepared to give us a report on how the process proceeded after the last meeting that we had on this subject. Are we ready for that presentation? Okay, please.
Thank you again for meeting today and discussing this matter. We do have a short deck. I don't know if you want to put it on the screens to discuss, as Councilman Miller said, the sale of 7001 Euclid, and kind of a recap of what happened on November 16th and where we've come since then. We'll actually revisit quickly, just to remind everybody. I always like to do that, the background of the property, talk about what has happened over the last few weeks.
And could you introduce yourself by name for the record?
I'm so sorry. My name is Ryan Jeffers. I work with CBRE.
Okay.
And then we'll also review the best and final proposal that was submitted. Again, to revisit, and we've discussed a little bit of this, but I always think it's a good reminder. We're here to discuss the potential sale of 7001 Euclid Avenue, which is a transportation facility that has been historically occupied by the Cuyahoga County Board of Developmental Disabilities. There's 2 buildings on the site, but primarily it's one large building and one very, very small outbuilding. So 64,000 square feet of total space. That is, by and large, could be considered warehouse with a small office component. The property is owned by Cuyahoga County, which is why the county, having title to the property, is the one dealing with the sale. But it has been occupied for 35 years by the Cuyahoga County Board of Developmental Disabilities. There are a couple of things that I want to make sure that everybody appreciates, and we kind of visit again. That group has been responsible for the costs of improving and maintaining this property for 3 to 4 decades. They've made over $7 million of investments at that property. It's in pretty good condition. It's a nice property. And the cost of holding the building while we work through this potential sale during winter months when it's vacant, because they have vacated, is over $5,000 a week, plus any repairs that might happen. And you're talking winter months of a vacant building at 70th and Euclid. So I think that's important consideration and context for what we've done in the last 3 weeks since the last committee meeting, because the sale of this property was agreed by the county to pass through the vast majority of proceeds to the Board of Developmental Disabilities. Effectively, it's a reimbursement for the vast amount of money that they've made or vast amount of money they've invested in the property over the last 35 years. And we're really looking to try to put a conclusion on an appropriate sale at a good time, because of the fact that that board, that nonprofit that provides services to citizens of the county that certainly need it, they can't afford to spend over $5,000 a week to hold that property and run the risk of liability and repair to hold it without some sort of certainty. So on November 16th, this committee did get together and we talked through the process that had played out over the course of the late spring, summer, and fall. And at that time, you'll remember the council committee members identified that they were unwilling to move forward because they felt that they really needed to have some date certain conclusion and closure on the process. They felt that that was one thing that we heard from the committee members. We did go through and review the tapes and made sure that our recollection on it was correct, but it was clear that the council members had indicated the issue that they really felt was that they wanted some date certainty, that everybody knew that the process would be done at a certain time and place. And that, to us, while we didn't want to necessarily go back and do it, that to us was something that we could work with. The other bidder at the time who had the lower bid had said that they would want to do some sort of open auction. That's unfortunately not a feasible outcome here. An open auction would require completely starting over. It would require at a minimum 2-month window on having to market as an auction to the public. Again, what we're trying to do here is not force the Board of Developmental Disabilities to hold on to this property for an extended period of time. What an auction also does is it statistically results in lower pricing. It gives you date certainty, but it almost always results in lower pricing. The alternative that the county council at that meeting gave us, which is what we more opted for in order to bring this to you today, was to do a sealed bid solicitation, to give both bidders an opportunity to say, confirm your best and final for us, bring it in writing, here are the instructions, and let's try to bring those results to the next committee meeting. So unfortunately, it meant waiting 3 weeks to get here today, but we were able to expedite that process. That was what was available to us. And that solicitation came out immediately after. It was a couple days so we could work through the logistics of it. But we were able to confirm that it was a process that was only open to the bidders who had properly entered the bidding on this property during the initial call for offers. And that's an important distinction because it wasn't open to the world. It was open to those groups who had submitted a bid by July 26th when we initially went to market. The best and final offers were due by Wednesday, November 29th by 5 p.m. They were opened in the offices of CBRE. We invited bidders and constituents from the county and the Board of Developmental Disabilities to attend. We recorded it. We opened it up. We required bidders to make their best and final on the county contract form and to sign it. That was a pretty material consideration during the negotiations in this summer and the fall. And we had some other additional forms that were also required. So when the bids came in, we made sure to verify that anything that was received that day was indeed in compliance. We did a preliminary review that day in the room. We followed up after that with a more thorough secondary review by counsel, legal counsel. And we ensured that what we received that day was indeed in compliance. We also made sure that everybody was very clear that that was indeed going to be the best and final offers. In lieu of having the bidders themselves indicate something was a best and final offer, which could be viewed as a negotiating tactic, as we learned 3 weeks ago, we said, we're going to make the rule here. No more offers after this. This will be your best and final offer. We won't accept changes after the submission. And we made a commitment to everybody that we would introduce anything that was presented as a best and final offer and was, compliant. We would present it to the county council for consideration. So I'm going to pause there before in case there are questions.
A couple questions. When you did the original request for offers, at that time, I presume that you did kind of submit it to the world, that you sent it out very broadly, as far as and wide as you could do. Is that correct?
Thousands of folks and organizations were contacted. Every neighbor of the property, every local developer, a few of the folks that you've seen come up here today, we spoke with individually. A couple, to actually walk through the property and really investigate a little bit. Anybody who was a local user, anybody who was a developer in a different part of town, all of the local stakeholders, meaning, so Midtown Cleveland is a stakeholder there, but we also talked to the CDCs, the city of Cleveland, the county. We reached out to the state of Ohio. We just made sure that everybody knew about it. And that's not just to see if they wanted to get it, but it's marketing strategy to make sure that if they tell people they know that it's out there.
And when you sent out that initial solicitation, did the solicitation suggest that the intent was to sell the property to the bidder that offered the best financial offer, or did it suggest that that questions of how the property would be used would also be considered in making the decision?
So the RFP, we had an RFP in the process. It outlined a number of considerations, and you may recall it was a similar form to what we used 5 years ago. You may recall that there were a number of things asking people to outline who the bidder was, their financial terms of the sale, earnest money, the timeline of the sale that they were proposing, and their final use. So we did ask for that identifying information because we do feel it's important when it's a government property that we want to make sure there's not an undesirable use that would be there. But when I say that, I don't mean to say that we're casting subtle judgments. I always bring up the very extreme example because it's instructive. If a brothel proposed on that site, we wouldn't talk to them. But we make sure that it's not an undesirable use. We did not have it in the instructions. It was important because of where the proceeds of this sale are going to go that we focus on economics. And we did share that with people, although it wasn't in the instructions, because legally, by your processes, the county does have flexibility in this regard. So we didn't prescribe a scoring system in this sale as we had in the past, but that was something that we had vetted with the county ahead of time. And we did tell bidders who were making offers at the time that the primary focus was going to indeed be economics, because the goal was to dispose of this property for the benefit of the Board of Developmental Disabilities. This money will flow into their budget next year.
Questions by my colleagues? Councilman Tron.
I'm not sure I understand. The goal was to be economics. Can you please define what that means? Because one could say economics was to get the highest number on the table for those, or economics can be what is its economics within its use. Which are you saying which was the objective of this economics?
The economics of the transaction. I'm sorry about not being clear.
The dollar's not the use.
The dollar's not the use, but again, to clarify, here's one of those things where the county has to have flexibility. Sale price is the most important consideration. If, for example, you had two offers at the same sale price but different earnest money, that might become a secondary consideration.
That's part of the economics though, of the deal. That's not the use. So let's make sure we keep those, at least from my own understanding as to how this process was played out.
Yeah.
So use was something that was listed as one of the 5 things or 4 things, but it was not a consideration as to acceptance or rejection of somebody's offer.
It was not made a focus, but it's all that context and background information that you take into account when looking at an offer.
Okay. But was it
it was not the primary consideration.
It was not a brothel,
right,
or an adult magazine store or something like that,
right.
We're not going to object to the use as long as it's something within whatever you.
That's what I'm saying. Okay. Yes.
All right. Between our last meeting and this meeting, you were now down to 2 people that you were having discussions with. Mm-hmm. Was there any restriction from either of those 2 to bring in other interested parties to help participate in their bid if they needed a number to go higher? Because economics is the thing. Would there have been any restriction from either of those parties to bring in a business partner with money in one way or the other, as long as the bid is still coming from one of those 2 categories? So
as long as it's coming from one of those 2 groups, there wouldn't be a restriction saying that you couldn't have an additional investor in the entity that would be acquiring the property. Nobody asked that question specifically, so we didn't have an opportunity to address it, but that wouldn't have been a restriction.
Okay, so there would have been no problem with Mr. George inviting somebody else, perhaps Mr. Geis says, hey, I'm gonna throw in X amount of dollars, or the other bid getting contributions from any of these folks that are on the map that we just looked at a few minutes ago.
If they're an investor in the entity, then no.
Okay, all right, so all the people who took this microphone up here earlier could have put money on the table to support the bidder if that was what was desired to do.
They would have had to flow through the bidder, but yes.
Had to be funneled through the same bidder, but they could have put money on the table no matter what.
And either group could have done that.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Baker?
Just to be clear, when the first 2 original bids came in and it was narrowed down to the 2, at that time, the Mr. George and the other both qualified, even though it was a little lower on the list, but they both qualified for passing your identifying use. That there was no conversation about, you know, we don't think that this is a good use for the property. At the time that you accepted both bids, both passed the muster of being identified as good use for the property.
Yeah, and we didn't really pass judgment on good or better. We just at the time said, would this be something that would be problematic and, you know, or cause a real issue? And we said no.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Conwell.
Why didn't the other bidders show up at the open bid, and was it a requirement?
Attending the open bid was not a requirement. We made the invitation open. We certainly wanted everybody to. When we sent out the instructions for the call for best and final offer, we sent out identical correspondence to each. Pardon me, I think that bug is going around to everybody. We sent out identical correspondence to each. We made sure, because of kind of the nature and the contention of the discussion, that we wanted to ensure that everybody was being handled equally. So actually any inquiries that came in, we required, put them in writing, send them by this date, we'll respond. That did happen. There was only one question that actually did get asked. To your point though, Councilwoman, the other bidder opted not to attend. They opted not to submit. We didn't hear from them one way or the other. So, you know, oftentimes if somebody misses something like that, you get that panic call of, uh-oh, you know, I missed this and what can I do? But we didn't receive that. So we assumed that that was intentional. You know, but again, it wasn't a requirement.
So what you're saying is, so we set up this final bid process, and they not required to show, but they had mailed in their bid though.
Well, they had a bid that was on the table November 16th. They did not submit anything in response to the best and final though.
Okay. Good to know. Thank you.
Good.
And there, if I may, because this might dovetail into your questions, Councilwoman, there wasn't necessarily a requirement in our instructions to increase offers for the best and final either. Certainly something a bidder could have done, but anybody could have shown up with the same bid that they had on the table and said, I'm just reconfirming. That was certainly an option that was available to them.
So from your standpoint or the process, you just assumed, you had to assume, since no one showed up or reached out, that you guys were going to go with that same bid that they had previously.
Well, that's the last bid that was made by that group, and that's the one, you know, I think that the mechanics of your group, and I don't want to speak for the council or for their legal representation, but I think the mechanics of your group are that you open up this meeting with that prior bid still on the table because no decision or action had been taken at your last meeting. And so we couldn't do anything with that bid. It's technically still a bid that was made, that's open, that is on the table, and hopefully we'll take action on both bids here.
And they were clearly reached out to that we were going to have that additional process.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Councilman Schrein.
Just following up on Councilman Conwell's, the bid of the 2.5, you believe is still on the table. They did, and even though they did not reiterate that this was their final and best, you are of the assumption that that bid was still in play from them. And so that was, with seeing nothing else in addition, that is their bid. And that's a bid that's on the table that could be accepted or rejected.
It's a technical matter. They haven't withdrawn it. We haven't yet sent any response on it that would reject it.
Okay. Were you surprised that they didn't even reiterate that this is our final and best bid at the closing?
You know, I don't want to pass judgment on it. I wasn't.
That's not a real complicated question. Were you surprised or not surprised? I
wasn't. I was a little surprised, but I wasn't exceptionally surprised.
Okay.
I knew it was a possibility.
Okay, thank you.
As our representative in this matter, is it your recommendation that we accept the offer that was received at the final bid process?
You know, if I may, that's probably a really good segue to just give you an overview of that offer, because I don't think we've done that technically, and then I'll address your question, Councilman, if that's all right. So the best and final offer that we received was made by Tony George on behalf of the George Family Enterprises. Its use intends for the offices of the George Group, for Apex Transit Solution, which is a transit company that they own. And I think there's a possibility that there could be some multi-tenant space for leasing that would still be available in the building after those groups occupy. The proposal that was made was $2.75 million with $125,000 of earnest money. And again, we debated this in our last meeting. That's the effective price. So that's the apples to apples comparison against other numbers that we presented to you. The due diligence period and the closing, we made sure, because it was on the county form, to identify that in lockstep with the offer that was presented on the 16th. So those are fixed dates in the contract, and, we would intend that would still be the dates, to get through those in January for due diligence and then closing in February, if not earlier. An earlier close is certainly an option to anybody in a real estate purchase. They were the only offer that was received. And, my understanding, again, just as a mechanical technical matter, is that this is a proposed substitute of the legislation for consideration by the committee. I don't know if I'm characterizing that correct.
You are.
Okay.
We have the substitute in the packet, and if we're going in that direction, we can move to substitute.
Got it. So, due to the pricing, the Board of Developmental Disabilities, and again, the sale of this property, what we're trying to do here is really something to benefit that group, a return on their investment for all these years, and to ensure that they're not left holding the bag on a potentially meaningful liability in the coming weeks and months. The Board of Developmental Disabilities will defer to the County Council if a decision is made to approve that proposed substitute, because the gap between these offers is just too large for them to disregard, given their mission and how important those dollars could be. And I just ask that everybody, not just council, but bidders and community alike, kind of appreciate that those dollars are meaningful for a very good group who has a very good mission. So that substitute is what's proposed today.
Okay, thank you very much. And does that conclude your presentation?
Unless you have any other questions.
Okay, Ms. Baker.
We're so concerned about the usage of this property, but I don't think we really talked about the zoning. What is the zoning of this property, and what is the potential of the use of this property if it were used differently than what it is proposed to be used for? Do we have the restrictions to say it must be what is the intention today, or can this property then be sold again by this private owner to be something else? So what is the zoning? What's prohibited? What can or can't be used for this property from this day forward?
So it's a wonderful question, and I will be the first to apologize that I don't know the complete answer on that. And perhaps I should. I know that it would be probably at our fingertips because we have that research. What I can tell you is, because of the current use of the property, that use, I believe, would be grandfathered in. Now, if there's zoning or use restrictions or construction restrictions that have been introduced over the last 35 years, those would typically only kick in the event of a redevelopment of the site, but the current use is typically grandfathered in. So I apologize that that's not a great answer. Your second question about the sale of the property, that's not something, except for exceptional properties, and by exceptional I don't mean great, but just very limited instances. That's not something that the county has traditionally tracked or wanted to track, because it becomes pretty cumbersome and difficult. If you sell a property to somebody, it becomes theirs to do with as they might, as long as they're following the codes and the rules of the law and the land. If at some point in the future they decide to sell it, the last thing the county wants to do is claw back the properties and deal with the kind of the difficult challenges of going through that. So the answer to your question is that a future owner would have the right to sell that property as they would need. Yeah.
Councilman Schron.
Oh, if I may just follow, can we get an answer to that question though of the zoning?
Yeah, I may even have it here, and I'll start looking, but I didn't want to stand up here for 10 minutes flipping through pages while you were all waiting on me patiently. Sorry.
All right, thank you.
Councilman Schron.
Of the prior properties that we've sold as a county and which you were actively involved in, how relevant do we worry about what the owner or the potential buyer is in regards to their use and their zoning? That's, once it's sold, that's up to them to work with the city and whatever zoning requirements, because we're not in the zoning business. And so as a
Right.
result, if the city has a constraint, or even the city can changes something subsequent to this, a transaction, that's not, we're breaking fast and breaking clean, are we not, in regards to this, is the old boxing terminology?
Yes, that would be, that would be true. Oh, this is good. I have your answer. So that is absolutely true. You're breaking fast, you're breaking clean. And you had referenced the prior process. In the prior process, we had talked about what future uses, and we had done investigations into people who were bidding on property just to ensure that they weren't tax lien violators primarily. That was an issue that we made sure of. And again, I think that as long as your proposed bidder would have gone through the appropriate ethics training and isn't somebody who's sitting out there with a massive tax lien, then you don't have that same consideration. You don't have that care here either, and I don't believe that's true for either one of the groups who've bid.
That's not a use issue again. If
It's not a
tax
use issue
lien,
again.
That
a
goes
buyer
back to
issue.
the economic issue.
Yeah.
And if the quality of the buyer is not one that we're comfortable with because we don't think they can't pay or they are delinquent, that's a different subject than just the straight use of how anyone attending that bought any of our county properties that we put on the market for these last 7 years. We've never asked about how are you going to use it, I don't believe.
We've asked how they're going to use it, but we've never followed
From a
up.
curiosity standpoint,
Yeah.
as opposed to helping participate in any kind of concern about zoning changes, or does it fit within the community, anything of that nature. That's going to be the local community that's going to get involved with it.
And when you're trying to promote development, you need to give people the flexibility to react to the market.
Have we heard anything from the city council person? Are they just, really wild off question? Are they concerned about use, and are they, and more for curiosity standpoint?
I haven't heard anything from them, but we did reach out to city council and the neighboring ward when we put the property on the market, just to make everybody aware. No concerns or desires were expressed at that time.
Okay, well, they have a bigger piece in that because they are the ones that control the zoning.
True. And the zoning there, to your question, Councilwoman, is MMUD 1 and 2. It's a Midtown mixed use zoning. Now, there's a lot of details surrounding what that is, but that would be the zoning for you to reference.
Good, thank you.
Absolutely.
Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to Mr. Jeffers, going back to the point that Jack Schrein made, you have worked on a lot of our projects here at the county. I'm particularly concerned why did you suggest, knowing how we've taken care of over these 7 years, other projects, the scoring process? Because I think if the scoring process had been in this deal, and I know that we're dealing with Board of Developmental Disabilities, but did you suggest of how we had handled these types of projects going forward, that the scoring process, not that it couldn't have its issues, but would have been probably a better solution because it would have given points on usage. It would have really brought in more of a community effort of what was going on in that piece of land.
We discussed it. We discussed it in detail at the onset of the project. So we were engaged, I want to say late March of 2017 to deal with this. And we discussed the scoring process. In fact, when we started off, we started from the basis of, are we going to do this exactly how we had done it the last time? And actually the direction that we settled on was to not put in the scoring because there was going to be such a primary focus on the transaction economics, that the Board of Developmental Disabilities really wanted to recoup the most that they could out of this to put into their budget for their mission. The county agreed to do that. And the other information that was requested was really meant to be qualifying and contextual information, so that if we had something that would have been really problematic that came back as an answer on that RFP, we could have dealt with it, not as a negotiation as much as a disqualifying consideration, but it was meant to be traded on price. So that's why the scoring system was ultimately not brought in, because the county has a agreement over $125,000, every other dollar goes to the Board of Developmental Disabilities. The county didn't want to pass judgment on the use in the way that, we're discussing today. That was an intentional decision that was made.
So the county made that decision with the Board of Developmental Disabilities. They kind of had that conversation. Okay.
To Mr. Jeffers, did you hear anything from Midtown Corridor about using a process that placed a greater emphasis on use prior to the time when the letter was sent out in the last week?
So Midtown Corridor has been in contact with us since the very beginning, as they're a local stakeholder, as they were focused on this project. So I didn't think it's possible that Mr. Epstein came to one of our tours, although don't quote me on that. But he's been paying attention. So there has been an expressed interest in the end use since the very beginning by that group.
Okay, thank you. Councilman Schreiber.
Regardless of interest of use, it was very clear, though, based on what I think you just alluded to, that the subject of use was not relevant to purposes of getting money back for the highest dollar economic for the Board of Developmental Disability. If anything, we've learned something by this process, but if that is going to be a factor that needs to be weighed in the future, but this seems to be pretty clear that what you set out as a goal was achieved or will be achieved if we adopt this substitute resolution that you've just gotten another $275,000 for the economic portion of this equation.
Okay, well, to my colleagues as the acting chair of the committee, I'm going to state an opinion, but this is just as one, and it takes 3 out of 4 on this committee to take action today, and 6 of 11 to finally vote on it in the council. But my belief is that that when a public entity sells property, the question of whether future use should be a significant consideration is always relevant, and should always be considered in terms of when the process is set up. However, as presented, that issue was considered, and the Board of Developmental Disabilities and the county decided from the outset to set up a process that very heavily emphasized the economics of the deal itself, and I don't believe it would be fair or right to change that focus at this very late point in the process, and I also believe that from an economic standpoint, we have a very favorable offer on the table, and I also think that an area such as Midtown Corridor, while focusing in particular areas, I don't think having some different uses going on that are well run and well conducted and well maintained is going to interfere with the success of the Midtown Corridor. And so for these reasons, my recommendation is that we substitute the legislation and recommend the the $2,750,000 offer from the George Group. I think it's a very attractive offer. So with that being put out there, I turn to my colleagues. Councilman Tron.
I'll second. And I can only speak from my own personal experience. We went into a site that was probably the worst site in the entire city of Cleveland, state of Ohio, the Collinwood Railroad Yards, the Brownfield. And was I desirous that the use was going to be all manufacturing? Absolutely. Today we have charitable, we have a medical, and we have a governmental oddity on that same piece of property. It would have definitely in my best interest to want that to happen in a use basis. I didn't own it, and as a result, I was subject to the buyer's use as long as it fit within the zoning criteria within the city of Cleveland. So I would agree with my acting chairman's comments on this today.
Any other comments? Ms. Conwell.
I'd just like to say, we being the county spend a lot of time and investments in trying to create jobs and promote new developments in this county. I believe there hasn't been any conspiracy, but clearly a flawed process. I focus on how we've carried over the years a scoring process, but by having a dual entity with Board of Developmental Disabilities in the county, maybe the focus wasn't exactly, put to the scoring process. But I feel that the scoring process could have been eliminated because it would have shown usage in developments do play a part when people have been investing and things of that nature. But this is clearly something that did not consider usage. It was all about money. And so we must go with that. This council from the beginning has also always been open and transparent. And so my recommendation is, as of the chair, to proceed. I mean, it's a fair process. Everybody was told what it was about, and I think we should move forward. Thank you.
Chair.
Yes.
Also, I agree with my colleagues. I do believe this was a process that was a bit lengthy and probably one of its kind from what I'm hearing, but I do believe that is a process that ran its due course. The property will probably be grandfathered for the use that it'll be used for, and any additional space that will be used for additional purposes will probably go under the MMUD, which will be the Midtown use zoning. So there, within itself, although according to the city, will be guiding that process. But that is some information I think that was useful to know, that any additional square footage that will be at least outside of the initial purpose will conform to the Midtown use zoning. So I do believe I will be supporting this also.
Hearing the sentiments of my colleagues, I'd like to make a motion that my motion is that we use the substitute on page 13 of the packet and substitute the legislation, making that the version that's before this committee. Is there a second? Okay.
I thought we already had those. Did we already have that, Jane?
Yeah, I think we were working from the
Right.
proposed. So
I have you as the first and Mr. Shrine as the second.
So we're working from the proposed. We're just doing
The substitute was not, we still have the old legislation in front of us.
Right, you just need to vote.
So we have to substitute.
Yes, you just need to vote.
Yeah. Okay, so the question is on substituting the language on page 13, implementing the offer from the George Group. Any further discussion? All those in favor of substituting say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed say no. The ayes have it, and we're substituted, and we don't want this to sit for a month over the recess, and so I would invite a motion to refer the legislation with a recommendation to the leadership for second reading suspension. Is there a motion?
Was it, were you making a motion, you were looking for the one?
I'm looking for a
Okay,
motion.
I'll move for second reading suspension.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to refer the resolution as substituted on its merits to the full council with recommendation for second reading suspension. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. And it is so recommended. Ms. Janine.
Resolution number 2017-0230, authorizing the appropriation of real property for reconstruction with additional turning lanes of Royalton Road from West 130th Street to York Road in the city of North Royalton.
Good morning, Nicole English with Public Works. I have a couple documents to give you. Back up. We're nearing the end of our project on Royalton Road, which is State Route 82 in North Royalton. We've been acquiring property for about 9 months now, and we have federal funding for this current year. So we've been working as hard as we can to settle. There's 7 parcels that we're having trouble settling, so we've decided to move to appropriate on them. There is 3 that we are still currently meeting, and we think we'll be able to settle before we go to court. However, to meet federal funding guidelines, we have to have the right-of-way cleared in January. So if we file, then at least we can clear the right-of-way. The packet I gave you is a little explanation of each of the parcels, and in red it shows why we aren't able to settle with them, the notes from our right-of-way agent. There's 58 total parcels. So with the 7 that we're appropriating, that's about 12%. If we settle 3 of them before we go to court, it drops it down to about 7%. Typically 10 to 15% is our average that you would file on, which would make an acceptable average. ODOT concurs because there's federal funding in the project. They have to concur with every move we make when it comes to the right-of-way. So they have concurred on the same action. So I'm willing to take any questions you might have.
I would note that the total dollar amount is $100,000 or so. It's not large in
Right.
terms of the scope of the project.
And it's not full parcels, they're all strip takes because we are widening from 2 to 3 lanes. So it's mostly just frontage, on people's property.
Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair to Ms. English, so these 1, 2, 3, 4, the 4 individuals that don't want to agree, where are we at? I read the explanations in red.
Yes, some of the people just don't even want to talk to our agent. They try to get in touch with them, and so the only way we have to move forward is to appropriate on them because they have to reply, once this happens. Some people have come in with a counter of, significantly more that they have no backup for, so we have no way of paying that additional funds. If they come to us and say, this is why we don't think your appraisal is right, and they give backup and we do a review and we get it to ODOT and they approve it also, we can settle, but some of those property owners aren't responding with anything.
Right, they don't want anything. So since we have this, what will that do to because I know we can't move forward without.
So once we file the appropriation in court, we are allowed to move forward with the project. Okay. So that's why we've waited as long as we can. We keep trying to work with the property owner, but we've sort of hit our schedule that we now have to appropriate. And so once it goes to court, we are able to clear the right of way and move forward on the construction project while you work out these details in the court.
Okay.
Any questions? Councilman Shan.
I assume of these 7 parcels, these are the ones we're bumping into. There must have been some that we did get an acceptable consideration. How far off are these folks when they're 3 times multiple in here versus what we settled the other ones for?
There is 58 total. We've done administrative settlements on 5, so that means we've gone over the fair market value on 5 of the 58. And, some of them range from $1,000 more. There was one that went in at 20-some thousand more, but that was an issue where now that we've moved the road closer to their property, the city zoning required a fence, which we didn't take into consideration when we gave them their first offer. So because we're moving the road closer, requiring them to have a fence, we now have to pay for that fence. So that's the one that was higher. But in general, the ones that were settled for a couple hundred, 1,000 more. So these are significantly over.
Okay, thank you.
I presume we need second reading suspension on this so we can get this.
We'd
get this
appreciate
going.
it.
Yes.
Move for approval for the second reading suspension at our next council meeting.
It's been moved and seconded to refer Resolution 2017-0230 to the full council with recommendation for second reading suspension. Any further discussion?
Just one question.
Okay.
I'm struggling a little bit. It's the first time I've seen this. Sorry.
That's okay.
And the parcel 61, is that the 61 that corresponds to the map? Or, because I don't, where would 10 be? Where, I guess I don't see properties we are talking about here.
The second page on the left side has 10.
Oh,
It's
I
real
see.
tiny.
Got it. So they are all identified.
Yes, so we've given you an aerial map just so you could see what's on there, and then also the black and white pages, those are our actual right-of-way plans, just to give you two different options to
Okay.
look at.
All right. If I just may, are those that are bordering the road higher in value? How do you know, how do you set those prices? Is it those that are deeper, larger, more concentrated on the road?
Everything goes into the value. You know, we hire an appraisal firm that does separate appraisals because we're using federal money. We then have to get a review appraiser to concur with the appraisal. So it's a fairly regimented federal process that we go through to set the appraisal. So just like if you were to get an appraisal on your house, you know, it's a similar approach. They look at surrounding land, how much they have, what's on it, the value. And then they look at the take and what the value is after we take that strip in the front, and that's what we pay them, that difference.
If I just may ask, for example, the property that's 31 and the property that's 35, 31 is more important to us because it's right in the right-of-way, where 35 may not be. Is that considered in the purchase price, or is it just based on what the appraiser thinks the property's worth?
So we only acquire everything we need. So everything that is touching the road, we've needed a piece of.
Okay.
Everything that's listed as a parcel. So we have bought pieces of all of them along the road because we're widening the whole road.
Right.
So the value
Of 35 would be much less then, because they have a much less frontage on that right-of-way? I mean, do you look at it that way, or I'm just wondering where the
Yeah, I
property
guess-
owner is coming from?
they look at all different factors. I guess I can't say right this second if 35, the whole property is valued as more than the one next to it. It's just a matter of what we're taking, then the difference of what we leave them with and what they have today is what we pay them for.
Okay.
So I would defer to our appraisals or appraisers on how they do that.
All right, just wondering if there was holdouts because of perhaps reasons like that.
You know, some people just hold out because they think they can get more if we wait till the last second. Some people do have valid information and we ask them to come back to us with that and we'll consider it. You just never know sometimes it's a national company, and in order to even get their lawyers to talk to you, you have to file.
Right.
It just all has different factors.
Okay, I was just curious. Thank you. Thanks for that.
Anything further? Okay, we do have a motion and a second, so the issue is before us for the recommendation with second reading suspension. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. The ayes have it, and it is so recommended. One more item, Ms. Janine.
Resolution number 2017-0231, making an award on requisition number 38434 to Trans System Corporation of Ohio in the amount not to exceed $709,061 for design engineering services in connection with rehabilitation of Hilliard Road Bridge number 08.57 over Rocky River and Valley Parkway in the cities of Lakewood and Rocky River.
Thanks, Nicole English again from Public Works. So we are looking to hire a consultant to begin the design of an improvement to Hilliard Road Bridge, which is the major bridge that's connecting Lakewood and Rocky River. It's over top of Rocky River and the Metro Parks, which there is a trail. If you have been over there lately, we do have what we call diapers on the bridge. You know, concrete is starting to fall. So we're pursuing federal funding for the construction, but in the meantime, we'd like to get started with the design so that we have a clear understanding of what we need to do to the bridge costs. Last year, we applied for issue 1 funding, and we did get 37% of the project paid for by issue 1 of the design project. So of the $700,000, 37% will be covered by issue 1. This is a part 1. We anticipate once we do preliminary studies, we know where we're going, we'll do a final design contract with Trans-System. So we'll always intend to have an amendment to this contract. The total cost of the project for construction is likely around $33 million. And we're looking to ODOT's major bridge program to fund that. So this engineering cost is in line with what we expected. 29 people pulled proposals. We scored 5 that came in, and Trans-Systems was selected to be the best.
And what do you expect to be the cost of the second phase of the design?
We actually anticipated the first phase to be significantly higher than what they submitted. So we're hoping the next phase would be around 1.5 million, because final design is actually going to cost more, because that gets you the full set of plans and through construction. So we would think, somewhere around 2.5 million total.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Questions by my colleagues? Ms. Conwell?
Through the chair to Ms. English. Okay. You said 33 million for the first design.
No.
For the construction.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
I was like, wow, what a cost.
We're in the wrong business then.
31%, you said that you applied for issue 1 funds and they already paid for 31% for the design.
We were given, awarded 37%. The way issue 1 works is you do ask for a max, but it's based on a percent. So since we thought the design would cost more, we actually have more dollars, but we're covered, we're committed, we can only get 37%. So we have 37% up to $1 million total from issue 1 for the design. Once we go to construction, we'd likely go back to issue 1 to help us with construction costs. But the way you apply for issue 1 is it's in the fall for the following year. So since construction wouldn't be until 22 or 23, we wouldn't ask for the construction money until then.
And this bridge, is it stabilized until?
It is. It's a major bridge. We're keeping an eye on it with those diapers, the concrete falling, we're catching, so at least no one's going to get hurt underneath it. But it's definitely been on the watch list from our bridge inspectors, and they want us to keep moving on designing it.
That is one project that could be something happens in the temperature or the weather, that could be an emergency. So,
it's pretty
I don't
stable.
know what diapers
No,
are.
Literally,
I
it
didn't know
looks.
what culverts were until I started here, but so I don't know the diapers.
The concrete's starting to come off of, and you could have some exposed rebar. It's not falling down by any means, but you don't want the concrete falling on people walking through the Metro Park. So we are covering it. Literally, it's just something holding up, catching anything that's falling down.
Gotcha. Thank you.
So the issue 1 design commitment covers both phase 1 and phase 2, is that correct?
Correct.
And what's the anticipated construction timetable?
We're looking at 22 or 23. ODOT is opening their major bridge program up for applications. They kept saying this fall, but they've yet to put it out. So we're hoping that once we know when they have money to do the project, we'll then schedule it in. So we're just trying to get ready, because they've said 22 and 23 is a realistic year for them. So in order to have a project ready by then, we need to start designing.
Can this bridge stay functional until 22 or 23?
Yeah, it's still solid. And we do inspect it annually, and we're out there looking at it to be sure. So I mean, it's a pretty major structure.
Any other questions? If not, I'll make a motion, and we don't want things sitting over the holiday, so I'm gonna make a motion to refer the resolution to the full council with recommendation for second reading suspension. Is there a second? Second. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed say no. And the resolution is recommended. Is there any miscellaneous business? Anyone signed in for public comment?
No, Mr. Chair.
There being no further business, we stand adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.